Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know the last thing young Nicholas's parents told him before they died? They said to obey Jesus and sell everything you own and give the money to the poor. Join with us as we go out into the night with Nicholas to learn about his secret midnight gift-giving and how stockings hung by the fireplace to dry became containers for his gold, thrown through a window, changing the lives of 3 young girls wanting to be married. Discover how these generous acts defined Christmas morning for us all, and how the legend of the stocking created the legend of Old Saint Nick.
Today, we're strapping in for a pretty big journey, a cross-continental, cross-millennia journey.
Just huge one.
We're tracing the remarkable life and evolution of one of history's most beloved and certainly most transformed figures, St. Nicholas.
Or as most of us know him today, Santa Claus.
And we are anchoring this entire deep dive on a specific historical date.
We are. For those who track this sort of thing, today is December 6th. It's St. Nicholas Day, which marks the date of his death way back in AD 343.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the image we all have in our heads, the jolly man in red, the sleigh, the North Pole, that is a modern invention.
Completely. It's a cultural invention, but it's built on a foundation of some really surprising historical facts and centuries of storytelling.
Exactly. Our mission today is to trace that dramatic transformation. We want to see how the true spirit of anonymous generosity survived the journey from a persecuted Roman province to a global icon.
It is a spectacular story. What we'll see is how one man's selfless acts, the original Bishop Nicholas, traveled across continents and morphed through, really, 4 major cultural stages to become the figure we know worldwide.
And here's the hook that shows you just how far we have to travel. When you think Santa, you think Arctic Circle, right?
Of course, the North Pole.
But the true origin, the real starting point, is so much warmer and older. Nicholas was born in the 3rd century in the village of Pantar,
Which is near the southeastern coast of modern-day Turkey.
So we're not starting with a sleigh. We're starting with a wealthy, young Christian man in a world where being Christian was...
Yeah, it was dangerous.
very dangerous. So let's start there, at the historical beginning.
Let's do it. Part 1, the historical bishop. The sources tell us Nicholas was born in Pantar into a very prosperous Christian family.
Right, but that didn't last. He became an orphan pretty early on and inherited this massive fortune.
And this is really the hinge point of his entire life, isn't it? It is, because he wasn't raised to hoard that wealth. He remembered his parents' lesson, which came straight from the teachings of Jesus. Sell what you own and give the money to the poor.
So he takes this radical path.
A completely radical path. He dedicates his life to God and just. Systematically uses his inheritance to help the sick, the distressed, the needy, and always, always anonymously.
That level of dedication, I mean, especially with that much money.
Yeah.
It must have made him incredibly influential, even as a young man.
Absolutely. His reputation was so strong that he soon became the Bishop of Myra. And he was known for generosity, sure, but also for his love of children and, crucially for this story, his concern for sailors.
And we mentioned this was a dangerous time for Christians. This wasn't some comfortable, seat of power, was it?
Oh, not at all. Far from it. This is where we see his courage. What's fascinating here is that Nicholas's identity was rooted not just in selflessness, but in actual persecution. The sources confirm that as bishop, he was imprisoned during the incredibly ruthless persecution of Christians under the Roman Emperor Diocletian.
Just imagine that for a moment. He's a high-ranking religious figure, arrested, and he suffers for his faith. This isn't just a kind old man with gifts.
No, this is a resilient, powerful, historical survivor.
Exactly. And surviving that persecution, that must have cemented his status in the church.
It made his story so powerful. He was eventually released, and later he was important enough to attend one of the most formative events in early church history, the Council of Nicaea in AD 325.
For anyone unfamiliar, Nicaea was where early Christian leaders met to, define their core beliefs. The fact that a bishop from Myra, fresh out of a Roman prison, was there, that shows his significance.
Mm-hmm. And that historical footprint, surviving persecution, shaping doctrine, that's what made his story so enduring after his death. It inspired thousands of churches to be named for him, and his tomb became a major pilgrimage site.
Which really sets the stage for the stories that would come to define him.
Precise.
And that brings us to part 2, The Legend of the Secret Gift Giver. His historical life established him as generous, but one specific story. They call it the Legend of the Stocking. That's what inspired the tradition of secret overnight gift giving.
This is the moment the legend fuses with the history. The story is about a local merchant who had lost everything. He had 3 daughters of marrying age.
And we should probably explain that. The lack of a dowry. Why was that such a life-or-death situation back then?
It was everything. A dowry wasn't just, a payment for a wedding. It was a woman's entire economic security. Without one, these daughters faced, well, poverty, or worse, slavery or prostitution.
It was a moral emergency.
It was, and Nicholas saw it that way.
So he hears about this desperate situation, and staying true to his nature of anonymous giving, he acts late at night in total secrecy.
That's right. He took a bag of gold, a huge sum, enough for a full dowry, and threw it through an open window for the oldest daughter.
And here's that little detail that connects to today. The sources say the money landed near a shoe,
Or a stocking.
a stocking that was drying by the fireplace. And that one tiny detail, that's the genesis. That's why kids hang stockings.
It is. So he did this again for the second daughter, but by this point the father is, well, he's suspicious. He's determined to find out who this benefactor is.
And he succeeds, right, the third time around.
He does. When Nicholas comes to give the third bag of gold, the father runs outside and corners him.
And what Nicholas says next is, it's the key to his entire character.
It is. He demands secrecy. He makes the man promise never ever to tell anyone where the money came from.
Which raises an interesting question. If he demanded total silence, how did the story get out? How did it become his defining legacy?
It's a paradox, isn't it? But the sources are clear on his motivation. He wanted all the credit to go to God alone, not to him. The story only really started to circulate widely after he died, as a testament to his piety. His anonymity is what made him famous.
It's amazing how that powerful secret act then gets translated into something as simple as a piece of fruit.
Right. Over time, those bags of gold were symbolized by something easier to get, something more universal: oranges.
Which is why you still sometimes find an orange in the toe of a stocking. It's a little reminder of that life-saving secret gift.
So from this secretive figure in Turkey, we move to part 3, the journey to Sinterklaas.
And as you mentioned earlier, Nicholas was the patron of sailors. That's a huge part of how this story spreads.
It's vital. The seas were the highways of the ancient world, so sailors carried his tales, his image everywhere, up into the trade routes of northern Europe.
And you see that influence most profoundly in the Netherlands, in Holland.
Yes. There, St. Nicholas morphed into the figure they call Sinterklaas.
Sinterklaas kept some of the key visual cues. He's a tall man, white beard, often in the red robes of a bishop. But the tradition itself starts to become more formal.
Right. The Dutch tradition centered on December 6th, St. Nicholas Day. Sinterklaas would arrive to leave gifts for good kids, but importantly, he also left lumps of coal for the naughty ones.
So he's still a moral figure.
Yeah.
Judgmental even.
Very much so. But by the time this version of the story reaches the New World with Dutch settlers, the figure is already partway there. He's wearing red robes, he's delivering gifts on a specific winter date. The stage is set for the final, radical American evolution.
Exactly. The Dutch bring Sinterklaas to New Amsterdam, which becomes New York. And that's where the most rapid transformation happens.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It does, because the Santa Claus we know is a true American invention. It was forged over about 60 years by writers and artists who never even intended to collaborate.
It's a perfect case study in cultural synthesis.
So, stage 1. The earliest American adaptation is from Washington Irving in 1809. In his book, Knickerbocker's History of New York, he starts to secularize the saint. He makes him a portly Dutchman and adds 2 key elements.
2 elements that are now non-negotiable.
Exactly. 1, he flies through the sky in a wagon. And 2, he drops gifts down chimneys.
So the chimney is locked in. Okay, stage 2, 1822. Clement Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas.
Which we all know as The Night Before Christmas.
Of course. And this poem was probably the single most significant act of transformation.
It gave us everything, the whole visual and auditory framework. The slow wagon becomes a fast, magical sleigh.
Pulled by 8 tiny reindeer.
Yes. And he gives them names. Dasher, Dancer, all of them. He changes the look from a dignified bishop to a jolly old elf.
And that transition from bishop to elf, that's a key cultural shift. It softens him, makes him purely magical and domestic. It takes away all the sternness of the original Sinterklaas.
And then finally, stage 3 gives us the rest of the visual and, crucially, the geographical details.
This is during the American Civil War, the cartoonist Thomas Nast.
He published all these images that solidified the plump, jolly look. But we need to pause on that timing, because the Civil War, that's the darkest, most divisive period in American history.
So why create this figure then?
I think it speaks to a deep psychological need. In the middle of all that carnage, Nast creates an image of domestic joy, of stability, of a unified national innocence. The Santa was a symbol of home and security that transcended the conflict.
And most importantly, Nast was the first person ever to suggest that he lived at the North Pole.
The final geographic divorce.
Exactly. By placing him in an unreachable, unclaimable Arctic location, he becomes universal. He's not Turkish, he's not Dutch, he's not even American anymore, he's global.
So, to put it all together for you, we see three separate sources, Irving, Moore, and Nast, combining the historical generosity of a bishop with American myth-making to create Santa Claus, the chimney, the reindeer, and the North Pole home.
A phenomenal case study. But let's shift focus for our last part 5, and connect the spirit of this all back to the deeper religious meaning that's in the source material.
Right, because the tradition of giving is anchored in a biblical foundation that's older than Nicholas himself.
We have to remember the wise men. The sources reference the Gospel of Matthew, where they follow a star and bring gifts to the Christ child. This act of reverence through giving, it's ancient.
It sets a sacred precedent.
And the gifts they brought, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they weren't random. They were deeply symbolic. They underscored the spiritual weight of the act.
What exactly did they symbolize in that context?
Well, gold symbolized Christ's royalty, that he was a king. Frankincense symbolized his divinity, his role as a priest. And myrrh, which was used for anointing the dead, was a somber nod to his future sacrifice and mortality.
Wow. It really elevates the act of giving beyond just the material. It ties it to worship, sacrifice, humility.
Which brings us right back to that core idea of selflessness that defined the original Bishop Nicholas, who gave away his entire inheritance.
We have covered so much ground today. We went from a persecuted bishop in 3rd century Petar to a secret gold-giving legend, followed him across the sea to become Sinterklaas,
and then watched him transform into a reindeer-driving North Pole resident thanks to American poets and cartoonists.
Right. But as we close, let's circle back to that one fundamental principle that defined the original St. Nicholas. When he was caught, he valued absolute secrecy.
He wanted, and I'm quoting here, all the credit for the good deed to go to God alone.
And that core motivation, pure, selfless anonymity, that is often the hardest thing to hold on to in modern life.
Which raises a final thought for you to carry forward, something that connects this deep history to your present. Considering Nicholas's fierce dedication to anonymity, what modern-day gift that truly can't be purchased, your time, your attention, a silent effort, what gift can you give this season that fully embodies that spirit of selfless, uncredited generosity?
Something to ponder as you consider the hidden history beneath the red suit and the meaning behind the gifts.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the home school for faith and family.